Well, we are blessed to welcome our friends at Fresh Start Mall campus. Let's do that right now, shall we? And we have with us here in Pine City Saturday night friends that have been gone for the winter. I guess they feel like it's safe to come back now. Carl and Judy Carson are with us tonight, and I don't know if you're going to see them at the mall or not, but we've got them here. And it looks like the winter was good for them, and we're blessed to have them back with us. Herschel, I don't think you're going to have as much solitude as you had before. So we are today finishing a three-part series that I've called A Day with God. And a couple of weeks ago, we talked about starting your morning with the Lord. And then last weekend, we talked about when you leave the house, how do you live with God and have God be with you throughout your day? And today, I'd like to have us think about the remainder of the day, the evening hours. And when I was thinking about the evening hours, I was reminded that the television media for years has called those prime evening hours prime time. And so, are your evening hours and your day with God prime time? Now, I looked up the word prime, and I Googled it, and the first thing I saw was that Amazon Prime dominated the first 2 pages of results from this search. So Amazon knows how to do that Prime thing, I guess. And then I looked up the definition of prime, and it says prime, of first importance, main, the best quality, excellent. So is your time in the evening prime time? Are you at your best in the evening? Is that when you experience the best of your game? Prime means of highest importance. We think of the words like primary or prime minister or prime number, key things like that. Carl Carson's back. He and I could relate to prime rib. You know, that's good, isn't it? You know, we talk about priming the pump. You know, to get the pump going. I was a volunteer fireman in a past life. I was young at one time, and we had to prime the pump on the fire truck pumper to make sure that it was going to work effectively. Primer paint. Have I given you enough examples of prime? Again, what about your evening? Are your evening hours the prime time or the best of your day? And when we talk about this, don't just give me the answers that you think I want to hear. Let's forget about the ideal and go for the real. Let's be realistic rather than idealistic and examine how we can have our evening become more meaningful in our walk with God. How can we enhance those evening hours? Our memory verse today is Romans 12:1. I find that the more Bible translations there are, the more choices, and it's when we memorize a verse, you got to pick one, pick a translation. I picked this one here. Would you read it with me? Ready? And so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all He has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind He will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship Him. Romans 12:1. Now the Message paraphrase puts it a little bit differently. Read that with me too, would you? So here's what I want you to do, God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Now that's the same verse in a different choice of words. You have in your program today the monthly bulletin that we get from Focus on the Family, and it talks about a mom's influence there. If you just want to look at that for a second with me, I believe you have this at the mall as well. A mom's influence, there's bullet points there. Just to look at those bold-faced bullet points, moms, you're not alone in influencing, but there's nothing like the timeless principle of a mother's influence. And then it says you can restart today. So when we think mothers and the rest of you on this Mother's Day weekend, how can you encourage your family to have the evening time that might be together time prime time, and that your influence will endure, ladies. And that's so important. You might think that your influence is kind of marginal, it's not so sure how much influence you're having, but I'll be sharing a little bit later in this teaching how my own mother's influence has shaped my life. So as we look at those evening hours, number one, share your life. That applies to you whether you're married or whether you're parents or whether you're single. We need to find ways to uplift and encourage and share our life with others. Those evening hours can be prime time for relationships. Please write that down. Prime time for relationships. How intentional are we about relationships? How can we prime the pump, so to speak? Philippians 2, 3, and 4, Paul says, when you do things, do not let selfishness or pride be your guide. Instead, be humble and give more honor to others than to yourselves. Do not be interested only in your own life, but be interested in the lives of others. So when we come together with others in those evening hours, how can we be considerate of others? How can we give before we receive? Is that true of your relationships? I think of family, and I think of the song. I had to check this out online. It was the Mills Brothers, and a couple of you are old enough. I bet Carl could finish this sentence. You always hurt the one you love. I looked up the words. You always hurt the one you love, the one you shouldn't hurt at all. You always break the kindest heart with a hasty word you can't recall. How many times does that come to play in our relationships, in our families even? So we're called to be intentional, to do the right thing, and to follow the words of Philippians 2 that we looked at there. A sad thing is, I just heard this on the news this week. I bet some of you saw the news report too. It started out, the lead was, there's one thing that 50% of our teenagers are addicted to. Did you see that? You know what that was? The phone, and it talked about kids being addicted to this animal. I know a lot of us adults are verging on addiction as well. And the article, the story went on to say how, you can tell there's an addiction when you get a text and you can't wait more than 3 seconds before you respond to the text. You ever have a conversation with somebody and you watch them take out their phone and are they even with me or are they on their phone, So whether it's texting or Facebooking or Twitter or Instagram, any of those kinds of things, we need to be able to set that aside in favor of relationships with people face to face, here and now. I got a kick out of, I think it was Robin Meade on Headline News in the morning on the cable channel 30, I think it is, talking about that and how the kids will interrupt everything to respond to a text. And Robin must be a parent of a teen because she said, unless it's their parents, then they ignore them. Can I get a witness? Anybody see that? Yeah, okay. So we need to be aware of the influence that kind of electronic technology has on us. We instead need to invest in what's most important. In fact, when I talk about prime time, and I mentioned priming the pump, I was reminded of the letter that was found in the desert about a year ago. Linda and I were out in Arizona near Tucson, out in the desert, and this letter was found in the desert outside of Tucson. This letter was found in a baking powder can wired to the handle of an old pump that offered the only hope for drinking water on a very long, seldom used trail across Arizona's desert land. This goes back 85 years. Water was scarce. It says this pump is all right as of June 1932. I just put a new washer in it. It ought to last 5 years. But the washer will dry out and the pump has got to be primed. Under the white rock, I buried a bottle of water out of the sun with the cork end up. There's enough water in the bottle to prime the pump, but not if you drink some first. So pour about a quarter of the water in, let it soak to wet the leather washer, then pour in the rest medium fast and pump like crazy. You'll get water. The well has never run dry have faith. When you get watered up, fill the bottle, put it back like you found it for the next feller. And it was signed Desert Pete. Well, I think there's a lesson there that we need to give first. We need to not just take that water and our own consumption, but to think of the next person, and God honors that. So we give and then we receive, and often that's the case in our relationships in those challenging evening hours of the day. So in the evening hours, share your life, and then number 2, enjoy your life. The evening can be a prime time for entertainment. Write that down. Wholesome, uplifting, relational entertainment. 1 Corinthians 10:31, Paul says, whatever you eat or drink or whatever you do, you must do all for the glory of God. So ask about your entertainment. Is the entertainment that we watch together on the television or on the computer, whatever, Netflix, is this God-honoring? Is it positive? Linda and I were away at the lake one night early last week, and we just had a couple hours open, and she had a series that she came across somehow. It was a police shoot-'em-up series from the mid-'90s. And, well, let's just watch an episode. At least there won't be commercials. That's the beauty of those video TV series, is there's no commercials. So we watched it, and it was so full of moral filth. In fact, on the cover it said NYPD Blue. Remember that one? They prided themselves on being the first TV series that was R-rated, and I don't think we realized what we were getting into. And I found that it was, how many sex scenes can you get into a 45-minute long show? It was pretty appalling, really, to realize how that has invaded our lives. The days of Andy of Mayberry, or those, what was it called, Gunsmoke, or those shows back there, you didn't have to watch out what your kids saw. But now you can't, you have to be watching every minute. So we become so accustomed to things that do not glorify God, that are not edifying, that are not holy, they're not God-honoring. I just, in that same time Linda and I were at the lake, my brother, who lives in Arizona, came across audio cassette. Anybody remember audio cassette tapes? A couple of you do. Came across this audio cassette tape that my mother had recorded for me in 1979. We're talking 37 years ago. And she was on one side talking to me, and on the other side, that was our way of communicating back then. I mentioned on the tape that phone calls were like 20 cents and up per minute. So we used to mail cassette tapes back and forth. This is the first time I'd heard my mom's voice in 37 years. And a lot of the stuff was just kind of meandering about this subject and that subject. It was not profound, but I noticed the God-glorifying tone of the conversation, and I'm telling her, I think I'm going to join the conference back in New York. I was in Kentucky at the time. I think I'm going to go back and become part of what was called back then the Central New York Conference of the United Methodist Church. And I'm not really sure whether I should be a preacher or not. I don't think I'm very good at that, but that's what I'm thinking about. And then she responds to me on the other side, very affirming and accepting and loving. And that was what the first reaction I had to listening to my mother's voice in 37 years. I look forward to sharing that with our daughter Amanda soon. Another area that Mom helped me in a lot was her example of giving to the Lord. And I'm going to share a little bit more about that. But first I asked a member of our Pine City campus to come and talk now. Some of you know her name is, she's got several aliases. She's Edna, she's Fred, she's Fredna.
I'll answer to anything.
And she was just reminding me that it was 5 years ago, this Mother's Day, that she and, I think, did you have Greg with you that day?
Yes. So yes, it was my Mother's Day wish 5 years ago that my family would come to church together here. We hadn't been going to church regularly at that time. And so life was great, but I felt like something was missing, and Greg and I wanted to find a church that we would enjoy together with our family. So when you ask for something for Mother's Day that doesn't cost anything, they comply. Kids came with us, and that was 5 years ago. When I look back over the 5 years, I see that God was just working back there. He was leading us to this church. Like I mentioned previously, I thought that life was just going great for us. But little did I know, a storm was coming, and I've shared with many of you before that, we've had a problem with my son. He suffered with a drug addiction problem. And had I not already been here, where I just met so many wonderful people that didn't judge, that helped me, they were just here for us and for our family and for my son. He's gotten to the other side of that problem, but it's just amazing to look back and see that God does take care of you if you just reach out, like the picture that's out there of God standing at the other side of a door, and all you have to do is open the door and let him in. And that's really what I think about when I reflect on my 5 years here. It's been amazing. So if you reach into your program booklet, there is a sheet that it has numbers on it. I'm going to start out by talking about the sheet that has the most numbers on it. There's a chart with all these. The first column on the chart says weekly income, and then it goes across and it gives certain percentages. And Pastor Bill asked me just to review this form with you. We're getting ready for consecration weekend next weekend, just to give you some food for thought through the week as you start thinking about what you're giving to God. So start out with that first column and just run your finger down that column and stop right around where your weekly income is. And then when you find the right column, just work your way across that. When you find the right row, work your way across that row to the amount that you're presently giving to God. And just circle that. Because what we're asking is that maybe you could take a step up this next year. God knows what we have. Everything that we have came from God. And it's just, I feel that it's personal between God and myself as to what I give him. He knows what I have. He knows what I give. And he's the only person that I'm going to have to answer to about that. So if you turn that form over now, there's a step chart. And what we are going to do is just share a breakdown of what the other members of our congregation are giving. So if you have your pen in your hand, I'm just going to work my way up the steps, and you can fill that in. So if you work down toward the bottom left-hand corner of that paper, people that are giving $9.99 or below per week, we have 52 members in that category, if you want to write that down. The next step up is $10 through $19.99, and we have 37 members giving at that level per week. The next step up is $20 to $29.99, and we currently have 19 members giving at that amount. The next step up, the $30 to $39.99, is 10 members. And then $40 to $49.99 is 11 members. $50 to $74.99 is 15 members. There are 5 members that are giving $75 to $99.99. There are 13 members that are giving $100 to $149.99. There are 4 members that are giving $150 to $199.99. And there are 3 members that are giving $200 to $299 per week. The last category is $300 and up, and there are 2 members that are giving at that level to God.
Thank you, Fred, for your willingness to share how God's been working in your life. And what she shares with us here is not that we're competing with each other, but rather than, you don't just take the church's budget and divide by the number of people and everybody just gives the same. It's not equal giving, but it's equal sacrifice. And a lot of times those lesser amounts may represent more of a sacrifice than some of the people on the other end of the chart. But it's just a blessing to see how God provides our needs, and our needs are fulfilled as we give to God. We give first to God. And then if this is the church that has helped us grow in the faith that we consider our church, we give willingly to God through our church. So I want to thank Fred for being here to share that with us. Thank you. So, I was just thinking as Fred talked about that, I mentioned my mother, influencing and inspiring me in so many ways. This was one area where we would watch her, my brother and I would watch her. As a school teacher, she'd come home and she'd have cash, actually, that she gave to the church every Sunday. And she'd put it in her envelope on the piano, and we knew that was meant to go Sunday to church when we all went. And that was without words, she was testifying to us the importance she placed on giving to God. Mom retired, and I didn't mention when I heard that tape of her. On that tape, she shared with me toward the end of the tape that she had been diagnosed with cancer for a second time, and that she was going to have to go to Roswell Park and receive chemotherapy, and she knew she was in the Lord's hands. But that's the way I found out about it, basically, was on that tape. And it was, wow, deja vu all over again, as Yogi Berra would say, to hear those words from her. But I noticed that even as she was forced to retire because of her health, she had multiple sclerosis, then she developed cancer. In the last year or two of her life, she continued giving to God. We didn't know that until she passed, and we got the report from the church, and her giving was not phased a bit. She continued to put God first and to give, and they had sort of a step chart like Fred just shared with us back then at that church, and I noticed when I saw that chart that she was one of the top givers in that congregation. Who would have thought it? She didn't talk about it, but she gave faithfully, and that has inspired Linda and me throughout our married life. In fact, Linda and I just were talking. We're going to take another step up this year, so we're moving from one step to another, and I would encourage you to pray about that yourself between now and next weekend. So as we talk about the evening part of our day, we share our life with others. We enjoy others in our life, even in the realm of entertainment. And then rest your life. Evening is eventually a prime time for sleep for most of us. Psalm 127:1 has been a key verse in my life for many years. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. So we get to go to sleep because the Lord's in control. And then the next verse, Psalm 127:2, would you read that with me? It's useless to rise early and go to bed late and work your worried fingers to the bone. Don't you know He enjoys giving rest to those He loves? God knows that rest is important. He made us. He knows what makes us tick. I forget that sometimes, This morning, for example, I overslept. I like to be up at 4. I know, I'm one of those morning people. I looked at the clock and it was 5, and I'm beating myself. What are you still doing in bed? And so I felt like it kind of got my day off. But that shows how crazy I am, doesn't it? Some of you night people would say that for sure. Rest is important, and I need to remember that. Rest can be used redemptively when we realize that it's part of the cycle or God's intended plan for our life. When I talk about rest, I think about Sabbath. And we're commanded in the 10 Commandments, the 4th commandment, to set aside a day a week. Now, Sabbath for a pastor is not on a Sunday, probably, but we need to find a day that we can set aside as best as we can for rest and rejuvenation. I got to confess, I'm still working on that. So you share your life, you enjoy your life, you rest your life, and then with respect to evening hours, you recharge your life. What recharges you? What replenishes you? I'm talking here about prime time for yourself. Last weekend, I talked about building space between the logs of the fire that you're building. Don't just pack it all in so tightly, but to find space in your life, to maintain or discover a pace that you can keep that's realistic over the long haul. We're called to be challenged and to work really hard, but then to take a rest and take a break. Stress and then release. That's the way our muscles are developed. The tide comes in, the tide goes out. With today's electronic devices that I already held up once, they tell you when you get a new phone or something like that, that the best way to get life out of your battery is to fully discharge the battery until it tells you it's time to charge it, and then to fully charge it. And your battery develops a memory that way. So fully discharge and then fully recharge. That's meant to be for our physical lives too. Oh, by the way, I think some of those evening hours, I touched on this already, with that addiction word, it would be good to declare maybe on some of your evening time, device-free, cell phone-free, TV-free, to fast from some of those things. Am I getting too radical there? But to show God that God is more important than all that other stuff. So as we've looked at these things, how is your prime time? Are you ready for prime time in the way you live your evening hours? A couple more verses we have here. Luke 5:16, it tells us, before 16, Luke says that Jesus is dealing with vast crowds, and he's very busy along with the disciples in ministry. And then it says, but Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. Why did he do that? He was getting recharged, rejuvenated. He knew the secret of you get totally depleted and then you're replenished by God. We need to find a way to get away and rest a while. 2 Corinthians 4:16, therefore we do not lose heart, though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. Now, none of us is getting younger. Every one of us is getting older. If you look in the mirror, somebody, I forget, Linda told me this, or I guess it was Linda. I don't do Facebook, but somebody saw this and told me that it's a person I know in Georgia. She wrote on her Facebook, she said, somebody has invaded my house. I look in the mirror and I see this old woman, and I don't know who that could be. Have any of you had that kind of a feeling? Or worse, maybe worse for me, is I look in the mirror and I see my father. Oh man, has it come to that? We're wasting away on the outside, but inwardly we can be renewed day by day. So use your days from morning till midday to the end of the day for God, and I think that can help us in the days and weeks and months to come to grow in our faith. Let's pray. Show us, God, how we can live all day with you. From the morning to the time when we go into our day to the evening, help us to honor you with every aspect of our day. In Jesus' name, amen.